Hi, I'm Cornelis van Lid. I'm based at Utrecht University where I work on medieval Islamic philosophy. Now, most of my philosophers are only extant in manuscripts, so that means that in order to do philosophy, I need to do philology. Many manuscript copies, however, are located in very hard to reach archives. They're either in remote places like Lahore in Pakistan at the border with India, or their custodians are very protective, such as is the case in the Topkapi Palace Museum Library in Istanbul, or the visitor system is simply not functioning very well, as the Dar al-Kutub in Cairo, or simply yet painfully, the archive is located in a war zone, such as the Zahiriya in Damascus. Now, I've tried to solve that by turning to digitized manuscripts. And what I found in my field was incredible. Literally hundreds of thousands of manuscripts have been digitized. And for the last few years in my online magazine, The Digital Orientalist, I've been exploring exactly what these digitized manuscripts are. I would pick up a collection and just poke around, see what's digitized, what's not, what the quality of the photos is, etc. And slowly but surely, I came to the realization that digitization itself is an editorial practice. Editing is not much more than out of all the data points, selecting those that in the view of the author or of the editor are most interesting. And this is a way for the editor to streamline and guide the attention of the user towards that aspect which the editor finds interesting. And then, of course, it's up to the definition of interesting to find out what kind of edition you end up with. Now, with digitized manuscripts, a strange paradox has crept into our work. You see, with people working more and more with digital surrogates, the question has been proposed, why do we even need to return to the actual artifact now that we have the digital document? So it seems that the more we work with ancient artifacts, with material manuscripts, the more we actually move our work into a digital workflow, into the digital world. But there is an even greater paradox, if you will, because when it is time to cite our sources, we all of a sudden seem to forget that we've used digital surrogates, and we prefer to refer to the actual material manuscript. So here's an example of how persistent that can be. The whole point of this article is to show the difference between using a material manuscript and a digital document. And even this author doesn't care for citing the digital surrogate. So that brings us back to the question, what are digitized manuscripts? Well, they're not all born equal. Take a look at this comparison. All ostensibly the same word, qala, which means he said, yet with vastly different digital representations. Especially noticeable is the resolution and the color accuracy. Or take this comparison of the very same yuqal, he says. It is the very same manuscript, page, same word, and in fact, 3 out of these 4 photos are from the very same click of a photo camera. Okay, noticeable is that the bottom left is from a different camera. It's from my own, to show the difference between my own photos compared to a professional photo. But we can even see that from the very same professional photo, different versions may arise. So the top left I got from going onto the website of this library and clicking the download button. And the bottom right I got by sort of sneaking behind the scenes of the website, looking into the assets that were on the website, on the server, and finding the highest resolution image of this folio. And then the top right interestingly, that's the one that I got when I asked the librarians directly by email, okay, send me your best quality image of this manuscript. Of course, they didn't want to do it. They said it's on the website. I said, please do so. And lo and behold, we can actually find a better resolution if we sneak around on the website than if we ask them directly. And it might not always be necessary, but it is interesting nonetheless. And there's even some slight color difference between these three versions of the very same photo. So knowing that is important to understand how to work around digital surrogates. Take this other example, for example. Here, the very same folio, one with a digital watermark and one without. Now, significant difference, I think. Maybe not so for the 99%, which is quite legible anyway, but it is exactly that 1% which is already hard to read, right? Which the copyist made a little slip of the pen, whose correct reading truly defines the quality of your edition. And those decisions should not be held back because there's a digital watermark going through it. Digitization should not be an impediment, should be an empowerment. So in total, I've come up with 10 notions in order to evaluate the quality of a digitized manuscript. Number one is the size of the collection. Now, how much has been digitized in relation to how large the collection is at this library or archive. And it tells you something about the commitment this archive is making in digitizing its assets. Number two is the online availability, because obviously it is much better to be able to access it online so that you can quickly draw in from many different repositories the things that you need. Number three is the ability to download, because unfortunately, even though we can access it online, doesn't always mean that we can download it easily. And this is unfortunate because there is just always so much more flexibility in having it yourself on your computer and being able to do with it as you want. Number four is the portal. That's kind of the online catalog, if you will. That's the way to get to your manuscript. How is this facilitated? Number five is then the viewer, which is that piece of the portal which allows you to actually see the manuscript, and there's a great variety and quality of these viewers. So number six is indication of page numbers, and oftentimes this goes wrong. The numbering of the digital files is inconsistent with the numbering of the material manuscript. And that means that if you want to actually cite the manuscript or its digital surrogate, then you need to sort of triangulate which folio you're actually at, because you can't always immediately derive it from the file itself. It's very unfortunate. And lots of repositories take a wrong turn here. Number seven is the one thing that people immediately think of when they want to assess the quality of a digitized manuscript, and that's the image resolution. And I see that as kind of a holistic thing. You can't just depend on DPI or file size or pixel size. It needs to be a combination of these three aspects and a visual inspection, because invariably some processing has been done in between the click of the photographer and the actually seeing it on your screen. That image has been manipulated in some way, and I just showed you those three versions of the same click to back me up on this. There's always some compression, etc., etc. Number eight is color balance. Just how true to nature are the colors in the photograph? And oftentimes, the most common mistakes are that there is a greenish hue or a bluish hue. on these photos. Number 9 is lighting, very important. Is it an evenly lit image, or can we clearly detect a light source coming from one end, casting hills of light and valleys of darkness? And not only gives this for a very uneven reading, it can really even sort of trip you up in certain cases. And then lastly, how the image is cut. And by that I mean, what do we see in the image? Do we see the edges of the manuscript, or is it just a text block, and can't we even make out what the margins look like? The first 5 notions describe the context in which a digitized manuscript is found, which says something about the origin and sustainable future. And the last 5 say something about the quality of the photo itself, and with particular focus, of course, on how well represents and can replace the actual artifact, the material manuscript. So evaluating a digital surrogate on these 10 notions will be easy to see that digitized manuscripts, they're different from the actual artifact. Indeed, it is easy to see that a digital surrogate is not just a better version of the actual artifact, one by which you can supposedly enhance an image size or reveal details otherwise not visible to the naked eye. Neither is a digital surrogate a lesser version of the actual artifact, as it doesn't provide an experience of the aura because it lacks a multi-sensual embodied experience. Okay, that may be true, but why would that matter? Digitized manuscript is not meant to fully replace the material manuscript. It's basically an addition to make certain cues easier. And most notably, that's the traditional philological work of establishing the correct reading. So a digitized manuscript is simply different, not better or worse. If we accept this, if we accept that digitized manuscripts are not a neutral window onto which we can look at the material manuscript, then it follows that we should disclose our use of it when we use it in an edition or in an article in our research. And this means that we should give a small description of it, a description of the digital materiality of the digitized manuscript. And that would be sort of a summary of these 10 notions. Could go in a cartographical description. It could be as simple and short as 1 or 2 sentences. For example, I myself have used something like this. The digital images I work with are 2051 pixels by 1925 pixels. They show 2 pages, and each file is about 500 kilobytes. The cut is tight, meaning we can't completely see the manuscript, and color balance is fine. So a much fuller discussion of all of this is contained in chapter 2 of my book, Among Digitized Manuscripts, Philology, Codicology, Paleography in a Digital World. I wrote this as a handbook for using digital photos of texts, and that's first of all manuscripts, but could also be archival records, of course. In chapter 3, I apply these 10 notions that I just mentioned to 20 repositories to give you an impression of the state of the art of digitization, as well as to show the variety of digitization that you may encounter out there in the field. The first chapter is a sort of a theory-heavy chapter that provides a background in what does it mean for a text, the very same text, to be either in a material manuscript, a printed publication, or a digital document. And these 3 different instantiations of the very same text mean that there is all kinds of differences in the use and the meaning of that text, in fact. And this is important because, well, first of all, digitized manuscripts are a crossover, interesting crossover between manuscript and digital document. But secondly, also because we as scholars are constantly moving through these three worlds. Most of the times we use things from the manuscript world, we work on it in the digital world, on our computers and whatnot, in order to produce something that is part of the print world, a book or an article. So far, we've been looking at digitized manuscripts as manuscripts, but they are digitized, meaning they're digital. What they may perhaps lack as a manuscript, they make up as being digital. And we'll go over some examples, all of which I explain in much more detail in the second part of my book, which gives a practical toolbox for working with digital photos of texts. Starting out with assuming no prior computer skills, going over things like how do you even encode, how do you type out ancient texts, using standards such as Unicode, TEI, IIIF, going all the way up to working towards automated image analysis using Python and OpenCV. All of this able to be done by a single scholar with a budget of €0. So one of these examples is, for example, this. What if we come across glyphs that are interesting? And here are three symbols in a book that I've been studying by a philosopher who claims that these three symbols, they represent sort of it's a summary of his philosophy, and only the initiate will be able to understand what these symbols are. Well, no one has been able to decipher what they mean, and so I started to collect digital photos of these symbols, and I found 6 versions in total, including that edition. And what I did then was I loaded them onto my iPad, and using Vectornator, I carefully redrew the symbols for each manuscript. And then in Adobe Illustrator on my laptop, I had an incredible flexibility of comparing the symbols, since now I had them in vector format, meaning I could move them around, rotate or resize, give different parts different colors. And before I knew it, I had figured out that each manuscript contained differences and that the symbols were likely made up of Arabic letters. Or perhaps creating an online catalog of an uncatalogued collection. This is not hard at all, I found out. By typing out all the information in Zotero, I was able to use the information for more than just a catalog. I created charts and maps to gain better insight in the origins of the collection, which was put together by Rudolf Geyer, Orientalist in Vienna at the turn of the century. So, for example, this bar chart gives information of the publication date of the items in his collection, giving some information on when he was collecting the most. And here is a map showing the place of publication of the items in his collection, showing the vast network that he was already able to have in his time. There's more we can do. Just like we can flip through a manuscript page by page, going over it, inspecting it, we can also do so with the images, photos we have of a manuscript, and feed them to a computer at high speed, asking the computer to only lock onto the black ink, drop everything else, stacking these 300 or so layers of wafer-thin ink on top of each other to gain something akin to an X-ray. I call it a scribe ray, as it clearly shows where on average the scribe placed ink. It reveals the text blocks and the number of lines per page, and with that information we could go back to one image and only concentrate on the margins and detect if there's any writing there. Lastly, I'd like to show that even codicological research is possible using just images. Islamic manuscripts typically have a triangle-shaped flap. Now, if we can write an algorithm to detect the angle of this flap, and we can, as demonstrated here, We can do so for tens of thousands of manuscripts and gain insights in the production of codices. Perhaps typical angles can be correlated with places or periods, giving us new ammunition to place or date an unknown manuscript. How much then of a manuscript is a digitized manuscript? Well, this depends and varies from digitized manuscript to digitized manuscript. There are advantages, there are drawbacks, and they vary in each instance. But what stands out is that their use seems to be inescapable. With the current rate of digitization, makes for very exciting times for classical fields in the humanities. Our work often involves the painstaking collection of little snippets of evidence from all these scattered sources and close reading to tease out meanings and intertextuality. And all of this can be done better, faster, easier with the use of computers. We give them, the computers, the boring stuff like remembering notes and perhaps drawing similarities between them. And we get to do the interesting stuff like evaluating if those similarities are meaningful or not. Now, this comes with an important challenge, namely that we invest ourselves in understanding to use these digital tools as best as we can. And that's really only logical when you consider that our fieldwork has changed so dramatically, or rather the soil of our fieldwork. Whereas before we would go to dusty libraries, we now turn to buzzing computers. And even if we go to a library, we invariably return with digital photos. So we need to be comfortable with this new soil, this digital soil, understanding the digital materiality of our manuscripts and notifying our readers of it. Gradually but perceptibly, our fields are turning digital, and that only means that it has never been a better time to be studying ancient manuscripts.